All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Bonfire Chat. Today is October 29th, 2020, and there is just a ton going on in the world. I'm really excited today, though, to have Glenn Arnold with us. I have known Glenn for, Glenn, at least the last 15, 18 years. The first time I met Glenn, he was a speaker at a Vistage group that I was a part of. And he came in and wowed me at that time with his knowledge of owner-operator real estate. And we all take his advice to buy our own pieces of property 18 years ago. We'd all probably be worth a lot more money than we are today. So today we're gonna spend a lot of time talking and picking Glenn's brain about what's going on in real estate, because no matter what your business you're in, COVID and the pandemic and lockdown and everything else has changed real estate in some way, shape, or form for you. And there's lots of different things that might have changed. And so we're gonna get some expertise from Glenn, and I'm really excited about that. So Glenn, thank you for being here. Really excited to have you. Just a couple of quick things here before we get started. First one, I really encourage everyone to go to TGG accounting/bonfire chats. There you can answer a quick 2-minute questionnaire. And if you want TGG or Glenn's help regarding anything regarding real estate at all, let us know. We'll obviously be coordinating to get Glenn your information to be able to help you and get there. Next thing that I wanted to talk about here really quickly is we're real excited at TGG to announce TGG Analytics. As you all know, TGG is an outsourced accounting department for small businesses. We work with companies from $2 to $100 million. And we design accounting departments for 40 to 60% less than full-time employees. And we promise on-time and accurate financials so that you can make better decisions in your business. What I'm really excited about here, though, is to announce TGG Analytics. TGG Analytics is coming out with a new product where you can automate your financial statements based on your software. It comes straight out with fancy charts, graphs, all sorts of KPIs that you can set. And we're launching it soon. We're in testing right now. It'll be launched at the beginning of the year. But sign up at our wait list. And if you sign up here before year end, it's going to end up being $99 a month for the product, but you'll get the first 3 months free. I know it says 1 month there, but I'm going to offer you right now the first 3 months free if you sign up on our wait list and get on the wait list for the beginning of the year. We'll be happy to show you demos, get you started, and get ready for the beginning of the year so you can start 2021 better than we've had in 2020. Last little plug for us here is TGG University. For those of you who don't know, we do have TGG University, where we offer classes taught by the best accountants for certificates from everyone from entry-level data entry clerks all the way up to CFOs, teaching the TGG way. And our instructors are professional accountants who absolutely live this stuff day in and day out. So if you have, whether you've got somebody internal, whether you have a CFO who's external, we'd love to educate and really push this message of running a business by the numbers to everyone who will listen to us. So visit tgg-u.com for more information there. Also, if you have a team of people, you would like a custom training, we're happy to design a custom training for you as well. So let's get to it. Glenn, I'm excited to have you on today and excited to chat with you about real estate, because I know we're dealing with a ton of stuff with regards to real estate, whether we keep leases downsized. You know, we had locations and expansion plans all over the nation, and now we're thinking, yeah, we're still going to expand all over the nation, but with people, not with space. So what is it like out there right now in the world of commercial real estate?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here. I think the best way to answer that question is to break the real estate into different asset categories and just say a few things about each category. The main commercial real estate categories are retail, and that's hospitality, sporting events, entertainment, conferencing centers, restaurants, shopping malls, etc. And unfortunately, the sad news is a lot of those businesses won't really be coming back. And that whole industry of retail has been changing really for the last 15 or 20 years. And I think that, you know, COVID just has really accelerated the way that things are now with retail and the new business models. And then moving to office, you know, office is going to be a pretty big challenge both for building owners as well as tenants, because everyone's trying to rethink and re-strategize and redefine what their future office needs are going to be. And it's kind of like what we know and what we don't know is this. What we know is that certain percentage of employees, once things get back to normal, whenever that is, certain percentage will be back on a permanent basis working inside the workplace. There's also a percentage that will work on a hybrid mode where they're doing part-time office and part-time at home. And then there's some that may never go back to the office. And so the real question is what percentage represents each of those categories? We don't know that yet. The other talk about office is, opposing forces. So, yes, people need less office space, but when they get back to the office, we need to be spread out a little bit more. So is that going to have, a net effect? We don't know. And then finally, what's the full recovery look like? And some people are talking 2022, some people are talking 2025. Obviously, it's very case specific and situational to the market. Then we move to multifamily, which is apartments. And by the way, I'm talking about these in the order of the amount of impact that they've had from COVID, most to least. So now we're talking about multifamily, which is apartment buildings. And there's class A, B, and C in multifamily, and pretty much everything that you've seen go up as far as new inventory in the last 10 years, especially if you live here in San Diego, is class A. It's been built on expensive land. It's oftentimes in urban areas, in our case, downtown and UTC. The rents are expensive. There's usually younger people living in these apartments. And with COVID, many of these apartment dwellers have the ability to go back to the nest when they lose their job or when things get tough. And also another option for Class A dwellers is to migrate to less expensive apartment space, Class B. And I think that there's going to be a considerable amount of that migration as well. Class B is probably the category in apartments and life science that's doing the best. Those are the white collar workers that didn't lose their jobs. And then Class C, you can guess what happens there. Those are the people without job security. So there's going to be some distress in that sector. And then finally, moving on to an industrial. Industrial is really the most sought after asset category amongst private and institutional investors. Everyone wants to be in industrial right now. Nationwide, as well as many of the regions, are experiencing the lowest vacancy rate since they've tracked it. And a lot of this has to do with the way we shop and do business and the increased demand for distribution and warehouse because of the way we shop with e-commerce. And then there's one little bright pocket. If you live in San Diego, you probably know this, and that's life science. And we're the third largest cluster of life science in the country behind San Francisco and Boston. And there's just an enormous amount of money and capital and venture capital that's going into private and institutional into life science. And life science actually is a subsector of industrial. So it's actually even exacerbated the need for more industrial. And I just remember when I was driving around at first, when we first had the shutdown, and I was driving around business parks looking at buildings and parking lots, and most of them were empty, except when I got, on your street, Nancy Ridge, which every other company up here is life science, and all the parking lots, were jam-packed. And I think, obviously, if you have a laptop, you can work at home, but, if you want to do lab work, you can't necessarily do that out of your garage. So that kind of gives you an overview of the 4 asset categories of what's going on.
So it sounds to me like what I heard you say: office, not so good. Multifamily, meh. Industrial, pretty good, really strong, and life science going through the roof.
Right.
Okay. So for our kind of listeners and clients, it seems to me like you got a bunch of different strategies here based on where you might land. But the first one is, what do you do right now if you've got excess space, and what do you do if you need more space? What are the two what are different ways to kind of attack this? Given the two ends of that, like let's say you're a manufacturing distribution firm, you've got industrial, or you're a professional services firm, you have office and you need less space. What's the way to attack this today?
Okay, I'll start with the short answer on industrial. if you need large blocks of industrial space, you're probably going to have quite big of a challenge, specifically here in San Diego. There just are not a lot of good large blocks of industrial manufacturing or distribution space located in central counties. Yes, if you're okay working in Otay or having a facility down there, yes, there's going to be inventory there as well as North County. If you're an office tenant and you need to expand, that's probably going to be easy. But I will tell you about, I think you asked the question, what do you do if you're underutilizing space? And obviously it's an important topic. And I kind of look at that in 3 different phases. The first phase, this is the current business owner that's underutilizing office or industrial or whatever it is. The first phase was, right at the shutdown, 30 to 90 days into it, when everyone was in this shock and scramble to get your lease out and review the lease clause to see what's enforceable in terms of things like force majeure and other mandates. Then during that period of time, that next 30, 60 days, there's a lot of discussions and proposals going on between landlords and tenants, specifically on the topic of rent relief. How do we survive? Can you give us rent relief? The second phase I see as 3 to 4 to 5 months into it, and most tenants kind of knew where they stood, where with their landlord in terms of initial restructuring, and the outcomes varied. It would really depend largely upon if you had a good business plan and how your financials were, and whether you're an essential business or not. And just kind of case in point, I remember speaking with an asset manager that handled categories of real estate all over the country, all the different various flavors of real estate. And I was asking him how they're dealing with specifically retail and office. And he said they're doing triage on most of their tenants. They're seeing who was in trouble before, who's likely to survive, who needs help. And then there's phase 3, which is, what I call the uh-oh, now what phase. And there's still going to be distress and uncertainty looming in the future. So what do we do with the underutilized space? And I think a lot of it has to do with, how much term you have left on your lease, because that can have a big impact on, how much leverage that you're going to have. But there's basic options for tenants to deal with underutilized space. And, the first one is, just ride it out, because maybe the market comes back at some point and maybe you start moving back into your office. Another option that's pretty obvious is subleasing all or part of your space. Another option is renegotiating all of your lease terms now if you can get your landlord's attention. But again, I think a key to that is how much term you have left and who's got the leverage. And we can talk a little bit more about that. There's always the buyout of the lease. And then there's, I'm not saying or suggesting this, but there's always the, hand the keys back and default on your lease. But in either regard, what's really important is to really reassess what your needs are, now look at your crystal ball, consult with your crystal ball, and work closely with, your commercial real estate broker to get good market intelligence, and understand who's got the leverage, and are you above, at, or below market? And like I said, key point is, if you have 18 months, 12 to 18 months left in your lease term, to some degree, you have more leverage with your landlord if you're interested in renewing, because you're at the point where you're going to make a decision. On the other hand, if you have sublease space and you only have 18 months left on that term, it may be difficult to find a tenant that wants to move in for 18 months and then have to relocate all over again after 18 months. So that gives you kind of a little bit of an idea of some of the options and strategies.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You use the word leverage a bunch of times, Glenn, and it feels to me like if you're in this situation where you want to try to negotiate with your landlord on some, whether it's renewal, term, whatever, what are the points of leverage that the landlord, I like to look at it when I'm in a negotiation. I like to understand where the person on the other side is coming from and what they're bringing to the table. So when you see this, what are those points of leverage that we ought to be aware of in coming into those conversations?
Well, I think points of leverage are, if you're an office tenant and you need more space, that's obviously a point of leverage. If you have good financials and you're in a growth mode, that's obviously good. But I think in terms of specific leverage points, I look at it, and I don't know if this is the question that you're asking me, but I look at there's a specific set of strategies that I like to employ as best practices in any negotiation. And that the main strategy is, and the way that you get leverage is designing flexibility into lease and real estate transactions. And what I mean by flexibility is, and I think that this is something that's really overlooked, is that I think, well, let me paint an example, a picture for you. I remember one time I was asked to come in to take a look at a negotiation that an office tenant was midway through in one of the most expensive office markets here in San Diego, in the Del Mar Heights area. And they had a 10-year lease that they were getting ready to do. And I said, well, why are you doing a 10-year lease? Why didn't you consider doing a 5+5? Or where's your early right to terminate? And the owner of that business said, we're just not really interested in negotiating. We think we've been here a while. We know what our needs are going to be. And against, they didn't want to introduce that into the negotiations at that time. And I'm thinking at this point, with what's happened, they're probably sitting on, $4 a foot rents, and they probably wish they had the right to do an early termination. Because obviously they'd be in a much better situation right now.
So it seems to me like one of the things that look, the place to start is to read your lease. And do you have these things like early termination rights in it? The force talked about. Are there other things though that landlords? I guess what I'm asking is, leverage seems to me to be also one of those things that if you know what the landlord's pressure points are, maybe there's other things that you could do to help alleviate those. So are landlords getting pinched, for example, by their banks right now? Are you seeing a lot of reassessments going on, for example, of properties? Are landlords looking at this as this is the time to get new people in at new rates? I mean, I know it's different for every product, but what are you seeing as the major pain points for landlords today?
Yeah, I think you hit on it. I mean, for many landlords that have loans on their properties, they're obviously going to be in a real tight squeeze. But I think it's all over the board, because you have certain investors that don't have leverage on their properties, and they're obviously in the best position. I also think it depends on product type, whether it's retail, office, industrial. So I think it's really across the board. But they have, the pressure points are pretty obvious. And if somebody doesn't have debt on their property, they're pretty much free to do whatever they want and ride it out. But those that, there are a lot of owners that are probably going to be in danger of having their properties potentially eventually foreclosed upon. So if they can't solve the problems.
Is there a way for somebody like me who's just a tenant to figure out what that debt structure looks like at the landlord, so that we have at least information coming into the negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, you can always, that's a good question. Depends on whether it's a publicly held company or whether it's private, but you could, it's kind of interesting. There's always, when tenants go and lease space, they're always asked to give the financials to the landlord, and that's sometimes an uncomfortable moment. But maybe now it's time for the tenant to ask the landlord for their financial, right?
I really like that idea. I hadn't thought about that before, but I really like that idea. And are you seeing then? So when you go in and do this, if you're looking for either downsizing space, or if you're looking to increase space, but you're changing your space needs, what sort of concessions? I always feel like, you want to buy at the bottom, sell at the top.
Right.
And we have this weird bifurcated market from what you're telling me, which is you're at the top of the biotech market and the bottom of the office market. So what, when you're looking at these, what sort of concessions should we be asking for with the different asset categories where you got office versus sort of industrial versus life science?
Yeah, so, the concessions fall into some main categories. They're base rent, what you're going to be paying year one. There's a tenant improvement allowance. There's, who pays the expenses. There's increases in rent annualized. And then there's, all kinds of other factors like what I started to talk about is, putting flexibility, designing flexibility into your into your agreements, like early terminations, option periods. So those are some of the things that I think are up for grabs. But when it comes down to it, what's interesting is that what everyone looks at is when they're trying to figure out, is the deal on the table at, above, or below market? Everyone, what do they look at? They look at lease comparables, right? And to the degree you have, cutting edge or the most current information on what's going on in the market, where you have information on where the leases have actually gone down and the concessions that are given, to the extent that you have access to that information, the better you're going to be armed, because more information in general, whoever has more information is going to win. But my point also is that most landlords and tenants, when they look at lease comparables to see what's the market doing, they're looking in the rear view mirror. And at this point, I'm not sure you can always look in the rear view mirror and say that what was done in the past should be what's going to be done, or the basis for what's done now. So I think when it really comes down to it, you really have to understand who has the leverage, and you really need a lot of market intel. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of understanding, negotiating points and pressure points and leverage points. And one of them is, and I think this is a very underrated way to get information and market intel. But if you're in a multi-tenant project or business park, one of the best sources of information that you can get is from your neighbors, and find out what they're going through, what experiences they've had with their landlord, what are their plans. I mean, if you find out your next door neighbor's getting ready to dump, a large amount of space on the market, and then you talk to others that are doing the same, that's one thing, And again, it also is specific based on the product type. Industrial, I don't think you're going to see the same sort of concessions. I think if you lease industrial and you expect to get lower lease rates and more concessions, you're going to be pretty disappointed, because you're not going to see it.
Sure. Well, this might be, so look, what I hear you saying is make sure you get the intelligence, understand what's going on, have the data, so that that's going to ultimately be able to provide you the angle that you want, the leverage that you want to be able to get what you want. But you just sort of keyed me into something that I think is your area of expertise above anyone else that I know, at least in the marketplace. And that is owning your own real estate. Now, sorry, before I also do that, we're starting to get some questions in the chat. So we're going to get to the questions at the end here, and I'll make sure we get your questions answered. So if anyone has a question, feel free to throw it in the chat, and I'll get to it. But what I really want to understand, Glenn, is whether you're an office or industrial, it seems like it might be a decent time to buy because interest rates are so low, and the government is providing so many great deals. What do you see as a good idea for people who may have an interest in buying, and is it a good time?
Right. So it's a great question. It's a question that a lot of people sometimes tie to the market cycle. But the bottom line is this: many years ago, when I started doing a lot of these type of transactions, I came up with a list of top reasons to consider owning and top reasons to not to consider owning. And there's maybe a list of 10 or 12. And when I sit down with a client, I go through those, and if I can check off 9 out of 10, that's probably means it's a good reason, and there's some good, reasons to consider buying. And I'll give you some examples of those. The first one is, do you and your business partners have at least 7 to 10 years left in the business? Because if your time frame is less than that, then you might find yourself in a tricky position where, in order to get out, you're going to have to time the market, and you're forced to buy low and sell high. Versus if you're going to be in the business and you say, yeah, I got 15 years at least, you're going to be able to ride any business cycle out, and it's less important what you buy, where you buy in the market, than it is all the benefits that accrue to a buyer over this period of time. So less than 7 to 10 years, probably not a good idea. If you take the next thing that's really important is just to analyze occupancy cost. So when you lease a space, you're going to have a certain box or bag of occupancy costs that you're going to incur under the lease. It's called the lease rate, and maybe it's expenses if you're in a triple net lease. And if you own a building, you've got a mortgage and you've got taxes, maintenance, and insurance. But what's really interesting to see at just the first level is your occupancy cost going to be above, at, or below what it would be when you lease. But the important thing to really do is to compare it not just on a pre-tax basis, but on an after-tax basis. So if it costs equal to or less to own, then maybe that's a good idea. And I can go on and on. You know, you have excess cash that you can, you don't need to invest. You have enough cash to grow your business, so you have excess cash for the down payment. And there's, you have steady, predictable growth, or you have tax advantages, specialized needs, and mainly you believe in a long-term wealth building strategy. Yeah.
So so it seems to me like, look, the base level is it cheaper to rent or is it cheaper to buy? That's kind of like a decision. And then the second decision, though, you know, I hear from a lot of people that their exit strategy of their business is I'm going to sell this thing in 3 years, but if I buy the property now, then I'll rent it back to the future owners in the future. Give me the pluses and minuses behind that, because that seems like a very common theme of I'm going to turn one income stream into another, and I'm going to have passive income moving forward. Why is that like the best idea ever, and why is it? What situations is it maybe a bad idea?
Yeah, so I go back to the first question I asked. If you already own your building and you're thinking of an exit in 3 years, that's great. But if you don't own real estate and you're thinking of exiting 5 to 7 years from now, it gets a lot trickier. And the reason why, and this is something that I have found is probably one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of business owners and trusted advisors make when they're analyzing, when they're going through the transition, succession, and exit planning in their business. A lot of the business owners themselves, as well as the trusted advisors, fail to really think deeply about what they're going to do with the real estate. And so there's so many scenarios. So instead of asking the question, do we hold or do we sell? I think there's a lot bigger questions to ask. And a lot of it has to do with who the successor of the business is going to be. So for example, if you own the real estate and you're thinking about exiting in the next 3 to 5 years, I start asking good questions like, who are the logical successors of your business? Are they children? Are they employees? Are they competitors? Are they financial buyers? Are they strategic buyers? Is it an ESOP? And if whoever the successor is going to be, what's the likelihood that that specific successor will need to, want to, or will be required to stay in that facility? And once you can determine who the logical successors are to the business, then comes the part where we can design the strategies, because it might, there might be several hold strategies and there might be several sales strategies, but most of them are going to be driven by who the successor of the business is going to be.
You know, that's a really good point, and something I really hadn't thought about is that it's not enough to just buy your building and think, okay, whoever's going to buy us is going to take over the lease payments, or I could just release it. I mean, what I think a lot of condo office buyer people, know now is, shoot, maybe you can't release it in this kind of an environment. So that's really cool. So your thought, what I heard you say, Glenn, is really make sure that you're thinking about who your potential buyer is, and that should dictate some of your real estate strategy as well. Is that?
That's exactly right. In fact, the truth of it is that a lot of times you don't know who your successor is going to be until you get there, right? Because I've talked to a lot of investment bankers, and I've talked about this strategy of trying to understand who the successor is going to be ahead of times. And I've had several of them say, you know what, we're all surprised. We don't always know who the successor is going to be. You might think it might be one, and it might turn out to be someone else. But the point is to develop the strategies for each one of those successors. And when we work with building owners and they're going through the succession and transition, what we do is what they call an in-depth strategic and financial analysis for the property. And we really pick apart each of the, we actually ask the owner of the business, rank from first to last, the most logical successors of who your business is going to be. And let's learn a little bit more about them. So if it's a national company that is interested in your business, but not interested in leasing a facility here in San Diego, what's the likelihood that they're going to want the real estate to lease from you or buy from you? Probably. So again, this is how we develop the multiple different strategies based on who the successor is going to be.
I think that's great. All right, look, we have hit 2:30, so we're right on time right now. And Glenn, your expertise today has been awesome. You know, for me, what I learned today is really think about leverage when I'm thinking about the leasing strategy. Understand what the debt is of my landlord. Understand what my neighbors are doing so that I get a good handle on that. What I also learned from you today was really, if I'm thinking about buying a piece of property, know who my potential buyer might be, so I can figure out if they're going to take it or not. And if not, what do I want to do with this? But before I do that, to think about, is this even just financially make sense? Am I paying less to own or paying less to buy? Which, I mean, I think, look, I do think it's a decent time for a lot of people to think about buying right now because interest rates are so low and the government has a lot of incentives, SBA and others, to get in with very little capital. So it is something I think everybody should at least explore. We're here at 2:30. I'm going to start taking some people's questions, but I have one that I think is at least on the top of my mind, and it has to do with the election. I know we've got our screen up there. I'm sorry, I'm being a bad host, but I'm just so eager to hear your answer on this question. What I do want to encourage everybody to do is, if you want any information on real estate, if you want to get in touch with Glenn, other people, please take two minutes and fill out our questionnaire there at tgg-accounting.com/bonfire chats, and we can make sure we help you take a look at that and get you in touch with Glenn or other professionals in your area. Glenn is with a national firm, Cushman Wakefield. They are wonderful. They have a ton of amazing professionals all over the country. They've helped me with my real estate needs before they were Cushman and Wakefield for at least the last 20 years. So love those guys and would highly recommend them to anyone out there. Where I was going with this, Glenn, is we've got an election in a few days. Okay, I want you to think about two different scenarios that are at the top of my mind. One is taxes and the other one is potential inflation. I don't know many people who are business owners who think tax rates are going down. Like, even if Trump's elected, I'm not sure tax rates are going down. If Biden wins, I think we're pretty sure they're going up. And in the state of California and probably other states that are facing some pretty massive budget shortfalls, we're already seeing them start to increase things like property taxes, school fees, et cetera. I see, and I know a lot of other people see, owning a building as a bit of a tax shelter, right? You put money in, you get the depreciation that's non-cash. And so you're kind of taking money that you would have spent in rent, you're paying it basically to yourself and getting it out somewhat tax-free. What is your kind of idea on, I don't want you to, you're not a CPA, so I don't want you to estimate where tax rates are going, but assuming tax rates are going up, how does real estate look? And then assuming that the government has to continue to print money to keep our interest rates low, and we have some inflation somewhere out in the future, how does that impact your real estate strategy? Sorry, big question, lots of stuff there. And then I do want to get to the questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, so I think, with property taxes going up, well, there's some issues that are being voted on with property taxes in terms of changing the base tax rate and not allowing tax protection for business owners over certain dollar amounts. And one thing that a lot of people don't understand about that is that if you're a tenant, regardless of whether you're in a gross or a triple net lease, those tax increases get passed on to you. But in terms of if there's higher taxes, I think it's kind of the same thing like when interest rates go up. I think that when interest rates go up, there's going to be some compression on the values because it's not going to make as much sense anymore. And I think the same thing is with tax rates. So as these pressures start to build with tax and there's less incentive, I think there has to be some give on the values. And at some point that's going to have an impact on the value of the real estate.
Got it. So if property taxes go up, that's going to negatively impact real estate prices. If income tax rates go up, it could positively affect real estate acting as more of a tax shelter. Is that kind of
Right.
would you say?
Yep.
And what about inflation? Like what is inflation? What have you seen in the past with inflation? What does inflation do to real estate?
Well, honestly, I've been in the business 33 years and I haven't really seen an inflationary time to speak of. So I don't really have that experience. But generally speaking, I think inflation increases the value of real estate because it's a hedge. But again, I can't really go back and look at any period of time to put my finger on and say, look, this is what happened during these years, because it predated when I got in the business, when we were in a high.
You weren't in the business in the 70s, Glenn? Come on.
80s, late 80s when I got in.
No, that's a fair comment. And it is one thing I love about you, Glenn. You're always going to speak the truth and tell us exactly what you think. And not afraid to say that you don't have experience in something. So thank you for saying that. All right, let's get into some panelist questions, because I think there's some good ones here. First one from I'll keep the names anonymous. What happens when you're trying to get in touch with your landlord about renegotiating your lease, but the landlord isn't calling you back? I had this, by the way, on one of my leases. We have leases in a fair many places in the country, and I had a landlord that just wasn't calling me back. What do you do?
Yeah, so I think I think the key there to understand why the landlord wouldn't be. First of all, I'm just thinking out loud here. There's a couple different questions that really are being asked here. So when someone says the landlord, I mean, that really could be the property manager, or it could be the asset manager. So, or it could be the actual.
Can you take a minute, Glenn, and just define for us what an asset manager, a property manager is, what an asset manager, and maybe what an owner is?
Sure. So I'll start in the big picture. Asset managers, they manage large portfolios, oftentimes of institutionally owned properties. And they usually make the big decisions on what to hold and what to sell. And they're usually, you're talking about, sales of business parks and multiple buildings, business parks, office buildings. So it's pretty large scale. And then, a property manager is the person basically that you call when the toilet is clogged. So that kind of gives you an idea of the.
No, that makes sense. That's a good way to explain it.
Yeah. And then sometimes, with privately owned real estate, sometimes, the phone number that you have is answered by the actual owner themselves. So I would first start with understanding who you're really talking with. And then I would also next understand who has the relationships and the market intel on what's going through the landlord's mind. And if you can't get through to your landlord, then your next best thing is to talk with your commercial real estate broker, or if you're just getting blocked, I mean, the real estate broker should know what's going on, because they're constantly talking with the owner, assuming that you're not the only tenant in the space, and they should be able to provide you some advice. And I think, it all comes down to leverage. What do you want? What's the landlord want? And who's in a position to negotiate and who's not? And, I think back to my answer about triaging, a lot of landlords are just going through triage. They're like, oh, they're still paying rent. I don't need to answer their call. Maybe it's just an avoidance. So I think you need to understand. Yeah.
It's interesting. I won't say where, but I had the same experience with this property, and I ended up talking to the property manager, who would call me back, but just said the landlord isn't going to do anything. And then we got to the asset manager, and the asset manager said, okay, let's talk about it. But ultimately, they didn't really want to do much about it because they had issues with the bank. And so I ended up going to the broker in the area, and the broker so far has given me kind of the best leverage, if you will, into there. So I think it's interesting to note all the different players, because I definitely didn't know that before I got into this. All right, so I got another good question here from the audience, which is, if capital gains and stuff are going up, and I don't know what this necessarily is it referring to, but we will be stuck with the property for 5 years. Should one sell prior to the inauguration or law changes while the market is hot in vacation areas? Are you seeing, for example, or certain areas, just take the vacation word out of there, are you seeing an influx of people trying to sell in an up market to time it before the tax law changes here at year end?
You know, we haven't seen too much of the potential change in the tax law drive a rush of sale to real estate. I would say the answer is no. I mean, that question's come up quite a bit. I think that there's many other important factors that drive families and property owners' decision as to whether they sell or not. And it has to do with just so many other different factors. But that question, as I said, has come up quite a bit. And the consensus is that the potential change in tax hasn't shown to be a huge driver. And, you know, it's pretty late right now if you haven't already and you want to do something. It's kind of, you know, you're getting late in the game.
I guess that would actually be a good follow-up question, which is how long would it take if you wanted to sell something? I mean, obviously it can be done very quickly at the right price, but
right.
Typical life cycle for either a purchase or a sale.
So if you're talking about what I do specifically, which is a lot of owner occupied and some investment, you know, I think it's going to depend on the asset category. And I also think it's going to depend on largely, I mean, here's what I do when I meet with an owner and we review pricing on the building. I draw 3 different boxes and I say, look, you know, here's all the data that we have to look at. Here's all the sale comps and here's the why. And here's all the data point that I'm relying on to come up with my recommendations on pricing. But let's lay out 3 different tiers of pricing here. And the top tier is, hey, listen, time is of no essence. And because of that, we're going to ask the highest asking price. And maybe we get lucky if the stars align and someone wants to pay us a price we never thought that we could get. But if that's the tier you want to be in, maybe we should earmark 6 to 12 months at least of marketing time, plus the amount of time it takes to close a property during escrow. And then there's the middle tier, which is I call meet the market. And that's where you look at the average time to market a property where you get maximum exposure, you know, at least 3 months, 2 to 3 months, not always, of market time, plus the time to close an escrow. And then there's a quick sale, which most people don't want to hear about. And that's, hey, we want to pick our best buyer within the first, you know, 2 to 4 weeks. But so that's why I always say to the owners, let's decide together which tier are you in. And then in terms of a buyer time frame, it depends on whether you're, you know, we have a deal right here on the street on Nancy Ridge. Somebody's paying cash and it's going to be a pretty quick close because they don't have to go through the whole, you know, lending process. But typically for most business owners that are buying buildings, they're going to need probably a first 30 days for physical inspection contingencies and review of all the contracts and title and those type of things, including getting an environmental report and an appraisal. And then usually they can close anytime. Financing contingency these days, probably 45 days from opening to 60 days. And then closing, you know, whenever they want after that initial, you know, 45 to 60 day period. So typically
so you're at a minimum 60 days, but probably closer to 90 days.
Closer to 90 days.
90 days just to buy something. And then I liked your 3-tier idea. I really like that 3-tier idea of kind of like a dream price, practical price, a fire sale price. And where do you fall in your timing as an individual when you're thinking about selling your building? I like that a lot. I think this is another good question here from the audience. If somebody was looking to invest in a property today, right, we got a depressed market in the office world. We have an industrial market that's pretty hot and a life science market that's through the roof. I mean, I'm guessing retail, by the way, is like also really depressed, probably more so even than office.
Right.
Where would you invest? What's the opportunity out there for investment in the marketplace?
Yeah, great question. So I think
occupied.
Non-owner occupied. Yeah, if you're just a straight investor, you're buying an income stream. So there's so many different directions that you can go on this, really. And what I first like to try to do is start to ask the person that wants to make an investment, you know, how old are you? What other real estate do you own? Where are your other assets? How much of your assets are already concentrated in real estate versus the stock market versus cash versus where else? And what are your short and long-term goals? And what type of returns do you want? And how much management do you want to take on? And are you a value add, or are you a person that really wants a coupon clipper and take no risk but get a lower return? And are you comfortable with the various types of real estate? What do you know? Do you own any income property right now? What do you know? What are you comfortable with? Are you happy with the returns, or are you sick of that type of real estate and want to shift and pivot into different type of real estate? And are you willing to do that? And are you willing to own property here in California where you're going to get a much lower return? Or are you willing to buy a property that's back in the Midwest? There's so many questions, are you just looking, what are your metrics to buy? Is it just on price per square foot, or is it rate of return, year one, or cash on cash? So there's so many different questions to ask. And as we go through and filter through each one of those questions, we can kind of narrow it down to, all right, it sounds like, the asset categories that might be a good fit for you are this and this. And, so that's kind of how the approach is. It's really not a one fit all, and it really varies depending on, all the answers to all these questions.
All right. So what I'm hearing you say is maybe there's opportunities in all of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What you've got to do is really think about what I hear the theme, and this is the theme I keep hearing from you, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it's very much an individualized goal-based approach, whether you should buy a building, whether you're going to renegotiate a lease, whether you're downsizing, whether you're expanding. It's really looking at the business plan that you have and your personal goals, and then driving towards that, which aligns really, really well with TGG, because that's exactly kind of our mold. Is we don't provide accounting, we provide financial advice that helps make business owners' lives better. We help them achieve their goals, which it seems like that's kind of your approach too in the real estate world. It's just, let's look, what are your goals? Let's answer all these questions, and then I can show you the exact right sort of investment for you. Because there's certain, right, if you don't like to deal with construction, you probably don't want to get into a place where you have to come and do construction work.
Right.
It's going to be a different scenario. All right. Last but not least here, and this is going to be my question. What do you see on the horizon for if we're going through a second or a third, whatever people are calling this now, wave? What do you see on the horizon for commercial real estate? Call it when we're all out of this, 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. I know some people have lost faith in some asset classes. I know others feel like, all right, it's time to go and prey on the buy at the dips. But what do you see as the big macro trend? Something that's we're gonna look back 5-10 years from now and go, okay, there was a shift and it moved over this way. What do you think? What do you see in a big macro shift that we could be mindful of moving forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift is really something that's already happening right now, and that is the way that people shop and the way that e-commerce is needs in real estate. I think that it's shifting away from, all types of retail. Obviously, restaurant, there's a lot of categories that are outside of this, but I think it's going to be a shift from getting in your car and driving somewhere where you want to go and look at a few things and select what you're going to buy, to shopping online and having a better selection and a quicker delivery and getting what you want. And that in effect is going to reduce demand on retail in the future, and it's going to increase demand on distribution. I mean, just if you look at what Amazon alone has done just here in San Diego, I mean, they've taken down, I think maybe, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think close to 1 million square feet just in the last year. And they're doing this all over. And Amazon is just one of the players. There's all these last mile delivery companies that partner with Amazon that all have distribution and warehouse requirements. So I think, looking back, we're going to see a lot more demand for industrial and a lot less demand for retail. And then office will come back eventually. And I think, if you're looking for great opportunities. I think office is one. Personally, I would be hesitant with retail, but I think long term, short term, people are going to be afraid to get back into office. But I think long term, that's where you're going to probably find some of the best values of buying and getting good deals in the next 12 to 24 months. But you're going to have some staying power, to get through, so you can wait out until the market comes back, and then you can take advantage of an improved office market.
I feel like this is a great, kind of thought process into segueing around what, buying your own office space. So in that office market, this could be a great chance to buy it and use the low interest rates, and again, the SBA rate, the SBA issues, and the depressed market to really get some good stuff. While you were saying that, we got a couple more questions, and we do have a little bit more time. Are you okay, Glenn, if we go?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I've got somebody here who says, as a commercial furniture vendor who specializes in systems furniture, our target clients fall under tenant development. How can we market/convince real estate and business owners who may not be open to renewing leases that we can offer reconfigures, rental furniture, and flexible/shared spaces to allow companies to save money via hybrid attendance?
Wow. I don't know. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. That's one I would have to give some thought to, honestly. I think it's going to evolve.
What seems to me as an interesting one there also is this is a chance for furniture vendors to work with people like you, Glenn, commercial real estate brokers, because if people like me who are running services businesses are reconfiguring, and I come to you and say, Glenn, give me your expertise, and you say, oh, I know Johnny, or I know Susie, furniture owner down the street. So the person who answered that question, I would encourage you strongly to reach out to people like Glenn and Glenn himself to really get in and make some relationships there, because I think what you heard today is the complexities of renegotiating a lease are pretty extensive. And so making sure that that you're going, brokers are going to be more necessary than ever coming out of this.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add to that is really that the folks that are on the cutting edge of what's going to happen and how we use office space are the design folks, the architects that are doing these designs right now. I can speak for, my company. We're making a move next April, and we're changing the type of office that we came from to the type of office that we're going to. We're going more towards a hoteling type of environment. So, but I think that it takes a lot of thought, and I think that you do need the professionals to get involved. And I think at the highest level, that's going to require working with architects and designers that are doing a lot of these new designs for tenants that are within that short window period of time of signing new leases and making moves to new space.
Got it. Okay. That's great. Yeah, because I think part of what was embedded in that question is how do we reconfigure the offices for when people come back, to be compliant with social distancing rules and things like that. So it really is a team effort, and thinking about the architects and the brokers and everybody together on that. That's great. All right. Last. So I think I said last time. So I'm not sure that this is last again, but right now it's the last question. What does the foreclosure market look like in the commercial space for the end of 2021 and into 2022? Is it reasonably predictable that retail, restaurant, and office will be in trouble? Meaning, I think what they're saying is as more people shrink their space, do things differently, what does that look like? And maybe it's different. Maybe, what I'm seeing also, which is interesting, Glenn, I'd love you to comment on this, is I'm seeing restaurants right now pouring out into the streets. Well, that can't last forever. So what happens when they have to come back? They're actually getting more space now for free, right?
Yeah.
And then they had before, more tables. So what maybe restaurant, retail, commercial, three different kind of, things to talk about.
Yeah, I think that the asset category that absolutely is at the highest risk is definitely retail. I think there's going to be the most pain there, and that's really that's the area where there's the most uncertainty. I think. And yes, I think unfortunately there are going to be foreclosures. So I think that's unavoidable. I mean, that's the sad truth of it.
And do you see that accelerating from where it is today in
Yeah.
2022 because
Yeah,
of that?
personally, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but until, there's a vaccine and there's a clear way out of this, I think that, COVID is going to be with us for a while, one way or the other. And I do think it's going to have long lasting impacts on the way people get together and shop and buy things and, restaurant, visiting restaurants and such. So, yeah.
Well, I think, that it's a great point, Glenn, but I want to remind everybody that the mall closures were happening pre-COVID. Significant numbers of malls closing. So retail was in trouble already before this, but really some great stuff. Again, kind of my key takeaways are, if you've got lease negotiations, get leverage, figure out the more information you can get, the better. Do your homework, make sure you understand where that landlord is, know the different levels of a landlord, an asset manager, a property manager, those kind of people, know who you're dealing with so that you can get to the right person, and then use a broker so that you can get all that information. The other thing that I heard you talk about here today was really segregate out your decision to whether to buy or to lease into which is more profitable for you right now. And then what are your long-term goals with the business? And are you selling? Are you staying in the business? How does that look for you? And then the last thing that I heard is if you're looking to sell and thinking about what's coming in the future, really start to divide it into those 3 tiers of that wish list price, that practical price, or that fire sale price, and then figure out your timing personally. What I got more than anything else from you, Glenn, was really, it starts with you, meaning the person who is the business owner. What is it that are your goals? Where are you going? And ultimately getting through all those questions. And then there's a right answer for real estate, just as there's a right answer for most things in business. So I just want to thank you for everything that you brought today. It was awesome. I want to remind all the attendees that you will, within 24 hours, you'll get a copy of this recording. We would love for you to share it. You can follow us on LinkedIn, all the different social networks, Instagram, Facebook, blah, 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 all those places. Once again, Glenn, you were awesome today, man.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks again. And everybody join us on the next one. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.